All right, so are you ready to blast off into some forgotten sci-fi TV?
I'm strapped in and ready to go.
Buckle up, because each episode in this series, well, it's like cracking open a time capsule, right?
Hmm.
Packed with all those lasers and spaceships and, that kind of charm you just don't see anymore.
It's like rediscovering a favorite toy from childhood.
Exactly. And today's journey, well, it's taking us back to the late 70s to a show that, well, it kind of blazed its own trail, even if it's, maybe faded a little from memory.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of folks might be surprised by this one.
Get ready for it. We're diving headfirst into Jason of Star Command.
Now there's a name I haven't heard in a while.
All right, so picture this, okay. It's Saturday morning, you've got your cereal bowl practically glued to your hand, and you're like primed for some action, and then boom, there he is, Jason, this kind of space cowboy, fighting the evil Dragos, who's, he's got this whole plan to rule the galaxy.
Ambitious, to say the least.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's funny, though. Jason of Star Command actually has a connection to another show from Filmation you might remember, Space Academy. Well, Jason actually got its start as a segment within a show called, get this, Tarzan and the Super 7.
Wait, Tarzan and the Super 7? I mean, I kind of remember that, but wasn't that like a bunch of different heroes all mashed together?
That's exactly what it was. Filmation, they wanted to create this kind of umbrella show with all sorts of action heroes. But even with all that going on, Jason of Star Command, it stood out. They had this serialized format that left kids hanging on a cliffhanger every week.
Oh man, talk about a way to keep your audience coming back for more. And they really spared no expense, did they? A budget of $200,000 per episode. That's unheard of for a kid's show, especially back then.
Yeah, that was a huge investment for the time. They were able to pull off some really impressive sets and special effects, even reuse some music from Star Trek, the animated series. They were resourceful.
Wow, really? I never would have guessed. So speaking of Space Academy, since, it seems like there's this connection, did any characters ever make the jump from Space Academy to Jason of Star Command?
Well, you might spot Peepo the robot or a Seeker shuttle here and there, but for the most part, they kept the shows separate.
So even though Jason of Star Command kind of spun out of Space Academy,
Yeah,
if you're watching Jason, you don't really need to have seen Space Academy to follow along.
exactly. They really made it its own thing.
That's interesting because, I mean, Space Academy was a pretty popular show in its own right. I guess that just shows how much faith they had in Jason as a standalone concept.
Yeah.
Oh, and speaking of familiar faces, wasn't James Doohan in the first season? Scotty from Star Trek?
That's right, he played Commander Carnarvon. Sadly, he only stayed for that one season because he had to go film Star Trek, the motion picture.
Yeah, I guess duty calls when Starfleet comes knocking.
But can you imagine if they had cast Jonathan Harris? Dr. Smith from Lost in Space. He was almost chosen for that role.
Oh, wow. Now that would have been a completely different vibe.
Oh, for sure.
So after Doohan left, they brought in John Russell to play Commander Stone. He was a blue-skinned officer, and he definitely brought this, like, stricter energy to the role.
Yeah, it was definitely a shift in tone.
Totally. And then in the second season, they made another big change. They switched from that serialized format to a half-hour format with standalone episodes.
Right. They probably figured it would be easier for kids to jump in at any point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Although with all the crazy space battles in the show, I'm actually kind of surprised they never showed any pilots actually dying.
I think that was a conscious choice by the producers. They wanted to avoid any graphic violence, especially given that their target audience was children.
Yeah, you're probably right. It was a Saturday morning show after all.
Yeah.
But they definitely didn't hold back when it came to those spaceships. I still remember Jason's ship, the Starfire, with that cool detachable escape pod.
Oh, yeah. And who could forget Dragon ship? Built right into an asteroid. It was so over the top.
Talk about an evil lair.
Yeah, it had that classic sci-fi aesthetic, larger-than-life villains, daring heroes, and spaceships that just fired up your imagination. And that's what Jason of Star Command did so well. It had this really unique place in the world of sci-fi TV. It wasn't trying to be all dark and gritty or anything. It wasn't aiming for that huge family-friendly audience like Star Wars. It just embraced its Saturday morning energy and delivered this like pure high-flying adventure.
Totally.
Yeah.
It knew exactly what it wanted to be.
Exactly.
So, thinking about it, it's kind of amazing how these shows, even with, budgets that might seem limited now and those special effects that, they can look a little cheesy today, I mean, they still manage to capture our imaginations so completely. It's really something.
It really is. I wonder what it is about that classic sci-fi spirit, that sense of wonder and adventure that still speaks to us decades later?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe it's time for all of us to fire up an episode or two of Jason of Star Command and, kind of take that trip back to that era of forgotten TV history.
I might have to do that myself.
Me too.
Yeah.
So until next time, keep your lasers charged and your spaceships ready.
See you then.
And may the force be with you, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.